Welcome everyone to today's webcast, and thank you for taking time out of your busy days to spend some time with us to learn about the new release of the Sustainable Mines Transparency Report and EPD framework. We're very excited to talk about how we have worked on aligning both with other participants in the industry as well as with technical standards and guidance also in the industry as we continue to strive towards our vision of having a standardized regional approach for doing environmental product transparency reporting, ultimately to create benefits for every stakeholder involved. For those of you who are not familiar with Sustainable Mines, thank you for attending today. And for those of you who are familiar, I'm just going to do a quick overview about who we are and what we do. Go over really a quick 3-year roadmap of how we got started creating transparency reports and developed the framework. And I want to take it back and kind of ground it in the intent of ISO 14025, the standard that governs this work. And then we'll do an overview of some of the key things in the release. And I'm excited to be able to show you something we've been working on, which is to finally have created a PCR catalog for North America that is online and anybody can access it, and I'll show you what's in it. And then share with you some of the learnings and the discussion questions that's come out of some of this work over the last 12 months that's gotten us to this point, and kind of wrap up with some conclusions and invite you to submit questions at any time. Either we'll take them during the webinar or I'll try to get to them after, and if I don't, we will definitely follow up with you and get any questions you have answered. Sustainable Mines is a B2B cloud provider of environmental product transparency applications, data, and services. So what does that mean? It means that we started in the marketplace back in 2010 with a software tool, and it was the very first software tool both delivered in the cloud and delivering a streamlined eco-design and LCA tool specifically for product manufacturing teams, not LCA experts, so that non-LCA experts could have a tool to evaluate the environmental performance of products that they've already manufactured or products that are in development, so they could have credible and real-time data to do modeling, measuring, and comparative assessments to make better informed design and development decisions. And it was purpose-built for that. Our software today is used in over 450 colleges and universities and businesses around the world. It was never designed, and nor does it compete with Gavi or CIMAPRO. Those tools are purpose-built and were originally purpose-built for doing full-scale, explicit LCA for technical purposes, and very importantly in this discussion, for producing LCAs from which marketing claims and disclosures can be based. But a few years back, when we were working with one of our customers who's used our software for many years and has integrated it into their product development processes, and that would be Toto USA, when the USGBC announced that LEED v4 was going to showcase product transparency and request that manufacturers start producing environmental product declarations or disclosures, we heard from our customers, and particularly our customer at Toto, hey, we're going to need EPDs. And to be honest with you, at the time, I actually didn't even know what an EPD was, being transparent myself. And so I said, well, we better go figure out what is so unique about EPDs so that we can better prepare our customers to create them. And, fast forwarding a couple of years, we did become a program operator so that we could create a program that delivered a better solution to our customers and that would actually get them to the intent of ISO 14025, which was to be transparent about the environmental performance of their products and stimulate the demand and the interest for higher performing products, with the manufacturers demonstrating continuous improvement. So we don't look like any other company in the space. We are a software company looking to use technology to standardize and scale and deliver useful and usable solutions. We deliver LCA projects, particularly for manufacturers who are looking to differentiate and to look for opportunities for continuous improvement. So we are a full services organization. But the way we scale our core products and solutions, which are digital software-based solutions, is by collaborating and partnering with other service providers and certainly with the standards developers and other verifiers in the space. So going back to the story about having to learn about EPDs, what makes them so special, we did a pretty significant research project, and this was 3 years ago, trying to understand what's in them and why are they all so different. So we looked at EPDs from all over the world and from different program operators for different product categories. And we came away with this set of conclusions, which is most of them are too long, not useful to make a purchase decision, and if they're short, they're actually not EPDs. Generally too technical, too much detailed LCA results that a regular person, meaning a non-LCA expert, wouldn't know what it means or what to do with that information. A lot of other environmental information that isn't connected or interpreted into what does it mean to someone who's going to make a comparative or informed specification or purchase decision. Little to no product marketing information, just baseline performance specifications. They're obviously not comparable, and our conclusion was, how does an architect, builder, or contractor use them to make a purchase decision? So our conclusions were that, and again, this was from 3 years ago, that the PCR EPD process as it existed, and pretty much still as it exists today, is not prepared to keep up with the demand for product transparency that is evolving in the marketplace. That this increased demand for transparency and greener products, it requires a whole comprehensive systemic solution. You can't just change the PCR process. You can't just change the way LCAs get done. You can't just change the way EPDs get created or delivered. They're all interconnected, which required looking at the whole system. And also keeping in mind that better design, just bringing better process design, information design, visual design to the process will help simplify what is quite a complex system. We also said, look, we've got to provide real advantages over how things are done today, because if those real advantages are not real and not clear, then there's no incentive for the changes to happen. We also identified that as more and more stakeholders from manufacturing organizations, industry associations, other interested parties engage in the PCR, LCA, EPD process, a lot of people are coming up to speed and up a very steep learning curve and making decisions about things they're not necessarily that well informed or that knowledgeable about. And therefore, decisions get made without necessarily understanding the implications of those decisions. And so we realized that any new kind of process or system had to allow for learning and continual improvement so that as the industries mature, they can understand how to make better decisions and how to make changes as standards and other technical bodies change without having things kind of locked in stone for way too long. And finally, we brought it down to, you got to focus on the benefits. And the benefit of the whole process is delivering the information in a report. It's the report that is the benefit. And ultimately, how that information is delivered to the end user will weigh out the relative value of that report, which means that the PCR and the LCA are a means to an end. And so what we did was we said, we've got to get started on how do we actually make a better EPD, and how do we really, I want to understand this process from the inside out. So we went back to the standard and really spent a lot of time looking at what it said. And a couple things, right in the introduction, it says, so on page 1 of the standard, it says, it is important to consider the information needs of different purchaser or user groups. And it goes on to say that those responsible for creating declarations and running programs need to pay due attention to the level of awareness of the target audience. So, all that, suffice to say, says you should be trying to make stuff that people understand and write it and present it at the level that will be consumable for the intended audience. I mean, that's really marketing 101. In the goals and objectives section, it says the overall goal of a Type 3 environmental declaration is to encourage the demand for and supply of those products that cause less stress on the environment, and to stimulate market-driven continuous improvement. But how is it possible to encourage the demand for and supply of better performing products if the way the information is delivered in the report is not understandable, nor does it necessarily make the case in most of today's EPDs that the manufacturer is actually doing things to cause less stress on the environment. And it goes on to provide a bulleted list of being very focused on how the LCA-based information and any other information should be in service of assisting purchasers and users to make informed decisions about products, and to prefer products that actually do provide better environmental performance. So we took all that in mind and created our transparency report. We brought this to market about 2 years ago. It's our brand of EPD. And initially, an EPD, a transparency report, was the outcome of a PCR created in the Sustainable Mines Transparency Report framework. But with our interest in bringing standardization and scalability and credibility and creating tools that helped purchasers and specifiers make better informed decisions and create preference for products that truly are higher performing from manufacturers of care, we said we've got to find a way for any manufacturer to choose to create a transparency report using any existing PCR, not just PCRs, that came out of our program. The transparency report is 3 pages. It was also part of our strategy. Nobody has a lot of time to read. It can't be 10 pages, 15 pages, 30 pages. We don't believe it's particularly useful to manufacturers or end users to provide 2 documents, a brief and an EPD. Why not just make an EPD that is brief and be very, very focused on only the content that meets the intent of the standard, which should enable people to specify products from brands they prefer to create this demand for better products. So the 3 pages of a transparency report are the performance dashboard that describes the functional performance, the environmental performance. This is in the cloud. As it links through to the manufacturer's website, to the certifiers' websites, to the standards and rating systems that they've earned achievements in. The LCA results are presented very simply. And here on page 2 is not only the interpretation explaining what's causing the impacts and where, and we have a lot of visual information design that we won't get into today, but very interesting how in a glance the information can be consumed. But the point is to say that right here the manufacturer can start talking about the programs that they're implementing or things that they're doing to improve the environmental performance of the products that's tied into this interpretation and the data story. And here's page 3, which is optional. So a transparency report is only 2 pages, with page 3 being optional, where the manufacturer can tell what I think is the most interesting part is their performance improvement stories in any combinations of pictures and text. Toto happens to like infographics, but it can be any combination of pictures and text, by life cycle stage. So what are they doing in any or all life cycle stages that are contributing to the performance improvements that we're hearing about here? And so the whole story is integrated. It's here's the product, here's what it does, here's the environmental performance story, and here's the improvement story, with exactly the manufacturer being able to talk about their commitment to environmental performance and these ongoing improvement stories. Now, I just want to stop and say that it also says in 14025 that a program operator can call their Type 3 environmental declarations anything they like, which is why we call ours a transparency report and not simply an EPD, which is not even the first thing on the list that they suggest that it be called. And it was not our intent to create confusion in the market. It was our intent to differentiate, which is to say there is an alternative to the way things are done today, and this is our way of indicating that to the market. So once we got through designing the transparency report, we turned our attention to our program as a program operator, because the PCR not only specifies the LCA calculation rules, it specifies the report requirements. And the other thing that we did was we looked at what was happening in Europe with the emergence of 2-part PCRs and really identified that this is a great way to begin to standardize and potentially even plant some seeds to create a program that could become a national standard in North America, where these calculation rules would never have to be revisited by a PCR working group, and neither would the report requirements. That would never change. And people participating in a PCR working group, they're usually manufacturers or industry association members, not really familiar with LCA or these reporting standards, but they're very familiar with the technical standards that govern the functional performance of their products and the way their products get manufactured and then get used and what happens at the end of life for their specific products. So our program, our Part Bs are called product group definitions. They're very simple questionnaires, really, that working groups can address the specifics of that product group, which we define as products that deliver the same functional performance and therefore compete for the same product specification. So the functional unit can be done at that product group level, and rules for comparability and scenarios and all the things that actually would make for a better LCA make sense to do it at the product group level, because now you're going to start getting better results that do take us down the road for better comparability. But getting back to Part A, the content requirements for a transparency report, again, we spent a lot of time with 14025 and identified the categories of content that 14025 calls for: product and company identification, the verifier's information, LCA results that deliver information about impact, variations that drive performance, and then these last two sections, I think, often get short shrift in many EPDs, which is relevant additional environmental data and certifications related to environmental performance. And then finally, relevant product manufacturing strategy and environmental ambitions and programs. And this is what our page 3 is really creating a place to tell those stories, as well as on page 1 and that introductory area on page 2, trying to weave that in throughout the technical data delivery. And the thing that we were very, very clear on when we developed these content requirements was that we were not going to fill the transparency report with any LCA information that didn't do one of two things. That it either has to specifically be reporting on the environmental impacts of the product, or delivering information to understand the environmental impacts, or to talk about how the manufacturer is making improvements. So a lot of the content in the LCA, like energy and material flows, waste streams, all of those have to be calculated, and they're in the LCA, and then they're all factored into the impact assessment results, because that's the point of the declaration, is to talk about the impacts by life cycle stage of everything that happens in the life cycle of this product. We said we're not going to include any of that in the transparency report because that's all in the LCA. And 14025 does call for the availability of a public LCA. It can be redacted. It doesn't have to include confidential information. But if someone were to ask for the LCA, there should be one available. And through the transparency report, you'll see there's a place where you can link your publicly available LCA if somebody really wants to geek out and get access to all that information. But we were very, very clear about separation of what's the content required to meet the intent of 14025 and what should stay in the LCA. And we're going to drill into that a little bit further. I already talked about Part B. It's a very simple form that allows product manufacturers in working groups to really focus on what they know best. Which brings us to the update of the transparency report framework. And what's new in 2016 is the addition of this word EPD, that now the transparency report / EPD framework can be used both to create any new transparency reports and any new either EPDs or transparency reports, because Appendix A prescribes the content required either in a transparency report or in an EPD. So the only difference is the format. You can have your choice of formatting those content requirements any way you like in a traditional EPD delivery, or now the transparency report is available. There are some other updates and changes that are in 2016, and I'm going to go through a few of them, and you can read the whole update report in this blog post, and there was a link in the invitation to this. But the first exciting thing is our forming, being part of the new Program Operator Consortium, which we announced the formation of at Greenbuild in 2015, and the website and our activities will be going live shortly. But the thing that we did first was we all agreed that the purpose and goal of an industry consortium is to standardize, is to help the industry come together in a standardized, consistent way, and to be able to make more services, provide more capacity, more services, so that manufacturers can work with whoever they like, knowing that they're getting a product that is consistent with what is happening in the industry. And so a core tenet to being a member of the Program Operator Consortium is that all of these program operators have now aligned their programs to Part A. And they'll use their own PCR templates, their own PCR development processes as outlined in their governance documents, but all the LCA calculation rules and report requirements are now aligned with Part A. Now, we've been doing a lot of research. We're a kind of a research-driven product development and user experience organization. And so just like we did that EPD study a few years ago, we said we really need to go out and look and see what's happening with PCRs in North America. And I'm going to show you, this is live now, I'm going to show you where this is so you guys can all go see it if you like. It's here. If you go to our website here at Sustainable Minds and you go to the Transparency Report Program tab, you can click on the North American PCR catalog. And it will also be available through the Program Operator Consortium website when that goes live. But I want to show you quickly, we've organized the PCRs by CSI division and shown how many there are, who the program operator is. These links take you directly to each PCR. And here's the important thing I want to bring people's attention to is the expiration date. And there's quite a few PCRs that are reaching their maturity. And the other thing to point out is there are a lot of CSI divisions where there are no PCRs. So there's a lot of opportunity. And you know, we chose this as an organizing principle, the CSI division, simply because people are aware of them and there is no other global organizing system for products in the building space. And so, well, let's use this one. Because PCRs have not been created until more recently, specifying the subdivisions that the PCR is valid for, we didn't feel comfortable determining those subdivisions, which is why they're only organized at the 0000 level. But what we found was that there were roughly 50 PCRs. We finished putting it up in April, from 9 different programs that is a lot of different stuff. 9 program operators, all doing things differently. And for those of you who are PCR savvy, although that's not something most people really want to admit to, but you know, even PCRs from the same program operators are not consistent or comparable. So that's a lot of different stuff that's out there in the marketplace. And we also noticed that 14, so that's a good percentage of 50, either have already expired or will be expiring in 2016. And there really is no general industry awareness of which of those PCRs are either being renewed or really, or even if there's anything new that's in development. And you know, firsthand, I've spoken with manufacturers who are in industries where these PCRs are expiring soon. And these are, you know, significant manufacturers in these industries who want to get started on LCAs and really have no idea whether that PCR is going to get renewed or even how it gets renewed. What are the rules for if a PCR is expiring, what happens to it? Nobody really owns that PCR. It's you know, out in the public domain. The program operator doesn't own that PCR. It's really members of the industry who step up and say, you know what, that PCR may exist, but I don't think it's actually meeting the needs of the industry as it exists today. Maybe there's a better way. And maybe we can do that with the program operator who created it, and maybe we need to look at a new source of program operation. But to summarize, you know, we created this catalog because there's been a lot of discussion in different sectors for a number of years saying, why isn't there a centralized source of PCRs? And, you know, we figured if we're going to be so audacious as to create a consortium of program operators, we should take on that responsibility, you know, to create that centralized, curated source, you know, and as a benefit to the community, and of course to inventory and benchmark the state of PCRs. The next tenet of the release is about standardized reporting, and I mentioned, you know, now the ability to create a transparency report or an EPD using any PCR, because Appendix C is the content requirements, and so now the manufacturer simply has a choice of format, how they write up and publish that content. So the transparency report is a standardized way to do it. It's in the cloud. It's a strategic marketing tool, but we really did feel this idea of we should liberate manufacturers from only having a choice of just a technical disclosure, most of which don't meet the intent of 14025. And of course, we needed to be sure that people felt confident that this thing's new, it's a new format. People needed to feel confident that the LCA rules and the report content are going to be the same no matter what format it's in, and that somehow, you know, things are not going to be different. So as I mentioned, you know, originally you could only create, or we only had the idea you could create a transparency report from the Sustainable Mines PCR, but, you know, if we really want to standardize and make it possible for every manufacturer to turn their environmental reporting into a strategic marketing tool, we had to come up with a way to be able to make a transparency report that could be verified to the PCR, where that is current, that exists in the marketplace. And so what we did was, after a lot of churn and a lot of thinking about it, we finally came up with the obvious solution. Sometimes, you know, things that look easy take a long time to figure out how to get simple, but we created our compatibility approach, our compatibility appendix. And what this means is we've taken Appendix C, which are the content requirements in Part A, and you can see here's a quick screenshot of page 1. And we looked at the content requirements of a transparency report, which are very prescriptive. We have line by line of what needs to be in it in each content type, with even back in Appendix C, we even have some guidance about kind of the quality or what that piece of content should achieve. So it really is focused not on just a specification list, but the reason for why to include that content in the requirements based on 14025. And notice it's a framework, it's a form. It doesn't prescribe layout or design. It just is a list of content by type. So the compatibility appendix is used simply to compare any existing PCR with the content requirements in Part A and be able to identify where there's additional content required by the PCR that isn't required by Part A, section by section, so that a manufacturer could choose to create a transparency report, but also have it be compliant with that PCR. Now, we did not want to compromise our commitment to a 3-page focused marketing tool by adding a bunch of stuff required by other PCRs into the body of the transparency report. So this is kind of the opposite of creating a brief and then delivering a full PCR. We said, no, the transparency report already is an EPD. It is a Type 3 environmental declaration. Let's keep that concise. And all the other stuff required in other PCRs, we're going to put on a page 4. So that was the only promise we broke to ourselves. We're going to make a page 4, and we're going to put all the other stuff on page 4. And it's shocking, actually, to look at the variations in PCRs and the amount of content that's required that doesn't tell the story of the environmental impacts of the product, but it tells all kinds of stories about what was done in the LCA that ultimately went into calculating the impact. And so part of this process and going through the compatibility approach is to enable manufacturers and industry associations who are either going to renew or create new PCRs to really question, why is that requirement being put into, why is that content requirement being put into the EPD if it's already in the LCA? So I'm going to share with you a case study that brought us to that conclusion that really drives this point home, that has gotten us to this space of advocating for simpler and more useful reports, but also part of that advocacy is advocating for manufacturers and their LCA providers to make that entire process simpler. And so the case study that we tried this all out on was doing a transparency report for Toto for their lavatory sink product. And it turned out that UL had taken an EBU PCR from Europe and created a sanitary ceramics a PCR. And one of the items mentioned in that PCR was lavatory sink. So we said, this is a great opportunity to test our method. But we also, this was happening at the same time, and again, for those of you who are in this world of PCRs and EPDs, You may have known that the USGBC had been working on a guidance document because they were feeling the need for there to be some standardization, and so tried to step up and play that role. And so this was our opportunity to evaluate both how to use a UL PCR to create a transparency report, but also, what was this additional guidance calling for, and would it actually improve the way PCRs and EPDs get created, or would it not? What would the implications be? So we did a compatibility template appendix for each, for the UL PCR as well as for the USGBC guidance. So we did both to see where there was additional content being called for in each of these content types and what was the same or different. And we did create a transparency report for several of Toto's laboratory sync products. This is live online. And part of what we've also introduced is the ability to integrate material ingredient reporting into that same transparency report. So there's a full comprehensive report of environmental performance and material health. And so this is really a content-packed report that online. There are these 4 pages, and this is page 4 for this transparency report that includes all of the additional content required by the UL PCR and the USGBC enhanced requirements. And I should point out, we did this project in the second half of last year, and it was released, I think, in Q1 of this year. But I want to show you a little bit of what we did internally, just trying to understand what standards were being used, what international standards were being used to drive different PCRs and these guidance documents, so that we could really kind of distill what is it that the market is looking for, and why are these different decisions getting made? Why can't we kind of arrive at one set of decisions and then make for a modular approach when other decisions or other reporting requirements are determined by a stakeholder group, no, really must be made public. All right, well then how do we do that? So we went through this pretty significant study to look at, if here's page 4, there's all this additional content. So we started to look at, all right, these are all intended to be based on EN 15804. So what of this content is all common to EN 15804? I'll go through this kind of quickly. We then looked at the USGBC guidance and looked at, again, what was common to EN 15804 and then what was unique to that guidance. Same thing with UL parts A and B. And when you line them all up, there's a lot of things, a lot of content that is common to EN 15804, things that were unique to the USGBC guidance, and things that were unique to the UL PCR. And the only thing that was common to both UL and USGBC guidance was data age. So we then also looked at ISO 21930, which is really trending in Europe and now here in North America, so that we could understand how 30 was similar or different to EN 15804, and recognize that it is fairly different, while requiring some of the same types of content. The reporting requirements are different. So in going through that process and doing the LCA for Toto, originally doing LCAs according to the Sustainable Mines Framework, Part A, and then having to redo or create new LCAs according to different PCR requirements, and then using different reporting requirements. Even though we have expert and professional LCA service providers as part of our delivery, when you look at the challenge of scalability in the marketplace, what most manufacturers or early adopter manufacturers are trying to do is to think about how do we operationalize that into our development processes. And so maybe we should train up an engineer, a couple engineers, folks in our own company to be doing this work for us. And it takes a little bit of time, but it's absolutely doable. A lot of manufacturers now do have their own internal resources where they're not expert LCA providers, but they're proficient at using Gabby or CIMAPRO to gather inventory, build models. But what they can't possibly be proficient at is interpretation of the results, but also interpretation of any or all of the different PCRs that they may have to use if different PCRs get created by different program operators using different rules that then require different LCA calculations and require different types of reports. It really is becoming a nightmare for LCA providers. And not only that, there's a trickle-down effect. If the LCA is done differently every time a new PCR is used, that means the verifier has to really dig into the PCR to make sure they're reviewing it to that LCA, rather than having a standardized PCR and a standardized way that LCAs get done. So the costs for verification are going to stay high because it's a unique project. And there's a lot of reformatting when you're used to doing an LCA a certain way, but then the report requires a different sequence or different format. I mean, it's just a lot of work. So it really brought this to the forefront, who is going to advocate for the LCA providers, and really just start asking the question, as well as advocating for the manufacturers, well, how much of the LCA content should be in an EPD? And, when is content useful to an AEC professional? And what is the role of guidance documents issued from organizations that are not program operators? And, let's really look at the challenges for manufacturers and their stakeholders for complying with all of these competing program standards and guidance to ultimately do the right thing. And so we kind of pose these hypothetical questions. When does the industry get annoyed enough to solve these problems? Honestly, part of getting annoyed means getting organized and doing something about it and agreeing to everybody, let's do the same thing, whether it's perfect or not, because let's have a system that allows for continual improvement, which means we can put a stake in the ground and get started sooner rather than later, knowing that we don't have to live and die by decisions that got made early on that weren't necessarily well informed. And so our goal and ultimately our conclusion is that, what the market really wants, this goes back to ISO 14025, is actually greener and healthier products, not just reports. This goes back to the continuous improvement. This goes back to people being able to understand from reading a Type 3 environmental declaration, what is the manufacturer doing to make a higher performing product, to create preference for those products, to drive demand for those products. And so if we can achieve that, everybody benefits. Manufacturers get to leverage their investments and get better results from creating Type 3 environmental declarations. Industry associations can play a more appropriate guidance role in the PCR development process because there's a standardized way of doing it and a standardized deliverable. They get to focus on what they know best, which is their products. It's better and beneficial to LCA providers because now there's standardized rules to make it easier and more cost-effective to deliver those LCAs, and for the ability for internal resources to execute against those LCAs instead of having to interpret a PCR every time they get started. Obviously, decision makers, customers and partners, big benefit to them because they're getting the information that they need in an understandable way to be able to reward the manufacturers. And finally, the green rating systems who got all this started, who have had to delay the release of, or the timing of some of the systems because there weren't enough products that had product transparency information because of all the problems we've talked about. The green rating systems are really going to finally win, that it will be easier to create more product transparency information. So there will be more products for decision makers to specify into buildings to build actually higher performing buildings, which is the whole point. So that's what I wanted to cover today. Looks like we have a couple of questions that had been asked, but I pretty much have answered. One thing I do want to talk a little bit more about the Program Operator Consortium. It's the same premise. For those of you who are on the call, when you have been involved in a large standards development process with lots of people representing lots of different organizations who each have their perspective to represent and potentially protect and therefore strongly advocate for, it's easier to get something going with a smaller group of like-minded people so that something can get off the ground, try it out, pilot it for a while, see if it works, and then open things up for other folks who decide, yes, I want to be like-minded, yes, I like the way this is working, yes, I want to throw in with this. So for the near term, the Program Operator Consortium will be, the members will be the founding members, but we are looking forward to opening it up to other members, certainly building a partnership and stakeholder network. But, we're at the beginning and need to get started, need to get response from the industry, and need people to engage and show their support by engaging. And we aim to provide a variety of ways to do that. It looks like I've answered pretty much all the questions, and unlike me normally, I've finished early. So I'm going to give each of you back 5 minutes of your day that you didn't expect to have and wrap it up now. So thank you very much for spending time with us today. And on your way out, I really encourage you to leave some comments for us on anything that you heard. We want everything, good, bad, ugly, don't hold back. And we will definitely follow up with you to keep this conversation going. So thanks again, and have a great day.